Welcome, families. It's Crystal Sanford, the host of Thriving Special Families. So glad to be here with you today. Our topic for today is supporting sensory needs at home, and our guest is Sonia Rubillo. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Crystal. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks so much. Thanks for being here again. Our last show was wonderful. We had lots of great interest in that topic, and we talked a lot about IEEs there. But today we're going to be discussing sensory needs. And as an occupational therapist, I know that you are the person to go to when it comes to sensory supports for our children. So we're so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
So, for those who are not familiar with Sonia, I will share that Sonia is a graduate in 2019 with her master's in occupational therapy from Stockton University, and she currently provides direct services and parent coaching through Triton Support Services, and she also provides OTIEEs assessments through IEP Ready. And she is definitely an expert in supporting our families who have children with sensory needs. I also want to share with parents, those of you who are watching live, feel free to add your questions or comments to the comment section, and we will do our best to answer your questions today live. And for those who are watching the replay, also know that we will attempt to monitor those comments or questions. Also know that Thriving Special Families is your podcast for special needs parents. Know that the information that is shared here is for your informational purposes only. If you are in need of specific medical or legal advice, we encourage you to contact a professional to get specific support for your questions. So, Sonia, let's just dive in. You know, I am such a big proponent of stories. I'd love to hear a little bit about what led you to become an OT.
Yeah, sure. So when I was younger in elementary school, I would help out with the special education preschool. And I became very attached to a boy who was diagnosed with ASD and he was nonverbal. And he made me so curious the way that
Mm,
he was able to read and recite Goodnight Moon, but was
mhm.
unable to have a conversation,
Yeah.
who
Wow.
was unable to sit down in a chair, but when the lights were off, was able to focus. And this
Amazing.
all ties in with the whole concept of sensory regulation.
Mm,
So when I first found out what OT was and that they really focus on sensory, it was it opened a whole new world to me. It's like putting together the pieces of a puzzle.
yes.
So I, from the very beginning, loved working with pediatrics. I in my undergrad career did observation hours at a medical pediatric daycare, a pediatric outpatient clinic, as well as working with adults. So I was able to get experience across the entire lifespan. So when I graduated, I knew that I wanted to specialize in pediatrics and specifically with students with ASD.
That's great. Such a need there. And it sounds like even at a young age, you just had that empathy and that interest that led you to where you are today. That's great. So, for those who, just to clarify, for those who might not be 100% sure, tell us what is a sensory needs or sensory regulation.
Yeah, so sensory integration is how we take in information around us, so things in our surroundings, whether it's visual information, like the lighting in the room,
Mm,
auditory information, maybe there's noise in the background, maybe it's the tag on our clothes that we're feeling.
mm,
So, sensory integration is taking that information that we're feeling and experiencing, processing, well, what does this mean? What does my environment mean to me in this moment? And then how do I react to it? So, students that and children that have sensory processing challenges might have difficulties interpreting that information.
mm.
And when students and children are dysregulated, they might appear to have tantrums or meltdowns. And these are terms that sound very negative when it might stem from sensory integration problems rather than behavioral issues.
Wow, that is so important. That's so important that you say that. And again, for those who don't know, I am the host of the podcast, but I'm also a speech pathologist by trade. I'm also an IEP advocate, and I support families throughout California and across the U.S. And in my experiences, I have seen children mislabeled. With that very thing that you just mentioned. Children are mislabeled as having behavior issues, but truly their behavior that they are presenting are the result of some dysregulation in the sensory input, right? And so, thank you for clarifying that because that can definitely be seen and it be confused.
Yeah, that's definitely a misinterpretation. Even professionals in schools, professional in different medical settings can label your child as non-compliant when
Hmm.
really there's an underlying deficit, and it might
Right.
very well pertain to their sensory system.
Yeah.
So, what can we do to help our children?
Yeah, that is my next question for you. For parents who are out there, and I know we're in distance learning, we're at home with our kiddos, and more parents are struggling than ever with their children's needs, and one of those being sensory needs. And some of our kiddos who maybe had it together in the area of sensory per se, for lack of a better word, are beginning to struggle, kind of reverting back into some of those behaviors because they're struggling more with sensory now that they've been at home for so long and out of their routine. So, what tips do you have for families when it comes to supporting sensory needs at home?
Yeah, well, the very first tip is just identifying the specific areas in which in which your child is having difficulties with. So, is it the timing of the day where they're experiencing these type of outbursts, let's say? Um, is it a certain type of environment where your child seems to be very upset or overwhelmed by something? So we really want to, first of all, identify the factors that are causing your child to feel dysregulated. And then the second is modifying the environment. So in that moment, let's say we are in a crowded place, which probably won't happen as much now, but understanding, well, I think my child is overwhelmed by the amount of noise in this environment. I'm going to
Mm,
remove them from this environment and give them time to process
mm,
and really calm down.
mm,
Within the home, modifying the environment during distance learning is especially crucial. Students might be heavily distracted by the light. I have one student, for example, who is in this beautiful room for his distance learning, but it's filled with windows and
mm.
extremely bright light, and he cannot focus on directions, on attending to the person that's speaking to them through the camera with that bright light on him.
Wow.
So I spoke with the parents and they got these curtains that can be used during specific sessions, and his focus has improved drastically just from that.
Wow, such a simple change made such a
Yes.
big difference for him. That's amazing.
And then my third tip is advocating. So once you've identified and understood that your child is having sensory difficulties or even suspicions of it, just seeking the guidance of occupational therapists specifically, as to what can I do for my child, because occupational therapists do specialize in sensory integration, and they do have really great tips and interventions that can help address these difficulties.
That's great. That's great. And so I love those tips. Really simple, making it easy for families. And I want to kind of break it down a little bit further. So identifying what the needs are, and some of that could just be observing, right? I think, I talk a lot about my husband is a really good observer of our kids. He's an inspector by trade, and he really does a good job of doing that. Just watching your kids, sitting down and just taking some time to observe them in their environment or observe them in especially in an environment where they are starting to struggle or you're seeing challenges and start noting and just taking some notes on maybe what's in the environment, what's happening, what time of day, just being cognizant and realizing what potentially could be some triggers for your kid. Is that kind of what you were saying there?
Yes, and I just wanted to dive in a little bit on how sensory difficulties can be observed in younger children and older children.
Mm,
So, for younger kids, and I'm talking infants and toddlers,
mhm.
is that these children might not be able to tolerate tummy time, let's say.
Wow.
So the feeling of being on their stomachs might be
Mhm,
very overwhelming for them.
mhm,
Um, a Requiring increased time to self-soothe. So if your
mm,
child starts crying, how long just really keeping track of how long it takes for them to be
mm,
able to regulate themselves. Also during dressing. So if you're changing a diaper or helping your child get changed in the morning, are they resisting? Is there a
mm,
specific aspect? Um, and then moreover, in toileting too, like when you go to help clean your child and you're using a wet wipe, let's say, that can be extremely triggering for your
mm.
child's sensory system if that's
Wow.
something that they don't like.
You know, what you're saying is just it's perfect, it's amazing. I have a daughter, most people know I have a daughter on the spectrum, she's now 10, but as I think back to her young, years, she hated tummy time, she hated it, and, as young parents, you feel bad because everybody says research shows kids need to have that tummy time, right? And so you try it, you keep pushing it, but then when you see that resistance, you don't just keep pushing it. You say, okay, maybe I need to change this. I need to reduce this, and keep track and monitor that because that could be a sign of something in the future. So, thank you for sharing that, as well as wet wipes. All these things I just think about back when I was a young parent. All these things that everybody says are good and are great for our kiddos, and you're supposed to use this and that may not be great for your child. And so we really need to be cognizant of that and listen to what our kids are showing us. It's very important. Behaviors that our kids experience and express, they're telling us something. It's a way to communicate, especially when they're younger and they don't have words yet. They're telling you something by those behaviors. So we need to really be uh, aware of those things and notice those things so that we can, better help them and better serve them. I also want to say hello to Emily, who's watching and engaging us here in our show today. And again, for those who are just joining us, I'm Crystal Sanford, your host for Thriving Special Families, where our topic today is supporting sensory needs at home. And our great special guest is Sonia Rubillo. If you have questions, feel free to leave those in the comment section, and we'll do our best to answer those today. And also, want to let everyone know that our show is sponsored by Sanford Autism Consulting, where we provide autism and IEP advocacy for families across the U.S. So, thank you, Sonia. You were just giving us some tips about what sensory integration and sensory challenges can look like in our younger children. How about in our older kids?
Yeah, so our older kiddos might have pretty intense difficulties with schooling, and
Mm,
it could be minor as well, just as simple as being able to attend to Zoom, let's say, for a certain amount of time.
mhm.
Like that light sensitivity of just looking at a computer screen might be so difficult.
Wow.
And then it could be on the opposite end, like I said, it could be severe where it's impacting your child's ability to engage in eating,
Mm,
which picky eaters,
mm,
lots of children are labeled as picky eaters when it might
yes.
actually be a sensory related issue. They might not like the texture,
Mhm.
taste, temperature of the food.
The
And then
smell, right?
yes,
Even? Yeah. My daughter, her new thing is that she doesn't like toast. She doesn't like the smell of the bread cooking. And so that's off the list right now. And, as a parent, you just have to adjust. So you say, okay, we're not doing toast. Now we're doing something else. And so we just have to learn how to adjust and still, shape things when it comes to food, for example, and give them a healthy diet in a different way.
yeah, that's a wonderful point is being able to adapt to that. Okay, instead of continuing to press her to eat
Right.
toast, well, let's try something else, and then we
Hmm.
can return to this at a later time.
Yes.
So that's really important, and I'm glad that you said that. And then to just touch back on what we said before about even hygiene and students that have these sensory difficulties might be opposed to certain feelings. Like right now, hand sanitizer.
Mm.
Some students may not like that feeling on their hands of hand sanitizer, but it's something that they are continuously told to do.
Mhm.
So let's look at alternatives. If they can't use hand sanitizer, let's maybe think of spray instead of a gel. Let's try to
Mm.
use different mediums to achieve the same outcome. Um,
Right.
and then also, students that have difficulties that are older might also appear to be more socially isolated.
Mm.
They might be aware themselves of environments that they do not like and do not tolerate, and that might cause them to seem uninvolved in things. Maybe the child doesn't want to go outside to play on the playground because it's loud or it's too bright, where other professionals might look at them and say, well, they just don't want to play with the other kids.
Mhm. Mhm. That's great, and that's so true. It could totally be something different than what it appears to be on the surface.
Yeah.
I do have a question in regards to how far do you push, and how do you know when to push and when not to? I think this is sometimes a challenge for families when you are trying to support a child with sensory needs. As a parent, you think, well, I don't want them to always deal with this and struggle with this, so I wanted them to try it. But then sometimes you're trying too much, or you push too hard, and then the child has maybe more intense behavior. So, how do parents learn how to balance that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is just modeling.
Mm.
There is a way instead of holding expectations where I just want to backtrack to the expectation. So, for example, children that are picky eaters,
Mhm.
um, there might be expectations at the dinner table that you are to clean your plates. Or you might say, I want you to take one more bite. Or I want you to try this. That's it. And it turns into you begging the child.
Mhm.
And in that child's perspective, you're holding expectations and rules. So really being able to have your child explore, I think is the most beneficial.
Mhm.
Um, that can include, if we're referring to dinner time and meal times, having the child participate in actually cooking the meal with you.
Okay.
And this allows them to get hands on with what they're going to be eating at dinner and really make them curious. Well, I did see all the ingredients being mixed together. I'm kind of curious on how the final product tastes.
Mhm.
So making those moments more interactive will help with the success.
That's great. I love that. That helps to get them to engage to the degree that they can feel comfortable. And I love
Mhm.
that building that curiosity, and that might cause them at some point to want to engage, to try the food, or to try the experience or the activity. That's great. Another question that I had is in regards to behaviors that parents are seeing. Is the self-stimming or self-soothing behaviors? And parents that I've talked to, some kids are doing more of that or experiencing more of that, and parents really aren't too sure how to navigate and manage the self-soothing behaviors, like tippy toe walking or humming or running or whatever these self-stimulatory behaviors might be for their child. Any tips for parents in that regard?
Yeah, so it's really important to notice how it affects your child's performance and activities.
Mhm.
So if your child is expected to complete specific tasks, for example, yesterday I was working on folding skills with an older student, and he was continuously stimming with his hands. He was spinning his hands.
Mhm.
During that moment, I put my hand between his hands. Then he self-directed to the activity.
Okay.
Um, and just like we were talking about right before we came on, was giving your child something to do.
Mm.
So if you know your child stims in transitions, let's say, and it makes transitions super difficult, give your child something to hold with both hands.
Aha.
And ideally, if it's something heavy, because it's giving their hands something, it's giving them both proprioceptive input from the weight and tactile input from the touch.
Okay.
So they are doing something purposeful. They're carrying something from one place to another, and they're not engaging in self-stimming behaviors.
That's really great. We had talked about, like you said, off air, a student that I'd worked with, he had some behaviors. And so, what the team did in this case is that they gave him, he was having behaviors from walking from the classroom to the lunch area. So, they gave him a backpack to wear and they gave him a box of the lunches to carry. And just that heavy weight really helped to ground him, I guess, and regulate him. On his way there, and the behavior is disappeared after about a week. And um, so I love that, giving them a replacement behavior that is acceptable, that is purposeful, and that can kind of help with addressing the self-stimulatory behaviors. That's great.
Mhm.
So, Sonia, tell us about a success story. Tell us about a child that you've worked with who's had some significant sensory needs, and you've been able to see some progress and some support in that area.
Yeah, I actually have a student who is a picky eater,
Mhm.
and picky eater, she
Yes.
does have sensory related issues,
Mm.
and also she has a tactile sensitivity. So that means she does not like the feeling of certain textures on her.
Mhm.
So students who have tactile sensitivity might not like the feeling of glue or
Mm.
something soft or something hard. They might not like touching paper. Um, so really, I have been working on her with her to address these specific skills. So yesterday we actually made a homemade puffy paint, and we used shaving cream and school glue and food coloring. But as we were making it together, we were being playful and messy. And I did not think she was gonna like the feeling of
Mhm.
all these different materials on her, but we did it in such a playful way that she was glowing. Um,
Oh.
so when I let her squeeze the shaving cream, and I mean, kids love that feeling and the sound.
Mhm.
And then I took it and I high fived her, and I was getting it all over her arms. So I did in such a playful way, she didn't realize that she might not have liked that texture. And beforehand, she was telling me, "Oh, I don't like the feeling of glue, it's too sticky." But once I pulled up the glue and I poured it all over her hands, she loved it. So
Wow.
I think the main takeaway from that is that it's okay to get messy, and it's okay to experiment with different manipulatives, especially when addressing sensory issues.
And I bet that parent was, like, so excited to see her child, make that
Yeah.
level of progress. Yeah.
Yeah, when their parents picked them up, they were absolutely glowing
Mhm.
and just bragging about the session and
Yeah.
what they did, and I thought that was very special.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think, you were creating a moment, a memory, like you said, you were making it fun, and all those things kind of outweighed the fact that she didn't like that consistency and that texture. And so sometimes we can be creative and craft moments and opportunities that, they pull in our children's interests. So many of our kiddos, especially on the spectrum, have these preferred interests, special interests. So if you can pull in the interest, if you can pull in things and make it fun and engaging, that'll be enough to help them be able to engage with it, even though it's something that they don't like, I think.
Exactly, and that's the same
Mm.
thing with going back to eating and students that do appear to be picky eaters, just engaging them in the creation of it and making it playful.
That's wonderful. Yeah, who doesn't wanna play, right? Especially as
Right.
kids, you know? That's great, that's great, and addressing those sensory needs right at the same time. That's
Mhm.
wonderful. So, Sonia, if there's other families who have more questions about sensory needs, of how to support their kids with sensory needs at home, how can they reach out to you? Maybe if they have some questions.
Yeah, the best way to reach out to me would be by visiting TritonSupportServices.com. And that is the wonderful company that I work for that really focuses on building great parent-child relationships and providing direct services. So visiting that website will allow you to navigate and connect with the entire team and especially me. Um, and I think we also offer free parent coaching courses through that as well. So even if you're just interested to wanna know more and may
Mm.
not necessarily want to reach out to a professional just yet, we have a great quiz on there that can help you identify maybe, what skill areas your child might have difficulties with, and then directing you to next steps. And that next step might include speaking with me.
That's perfect. You make it so simple and easy. I love that as an opportunity, as an option. So, families, if you have any other questions for Sonia, let us know as we wrap up in the next few minutes. For those who are just joining us again, our topic today is supporting sensory needs at home, and our special guest is Sonia Rubio, occupational therapist here in San Diego, California, and we've discussed identifying. Finding out what your child's sensory needs are, and then looking and reaching out to professionals uh, to get the support that you need to help in those areas. Also, making attempts to make things fun so that you're addressing the sensory needs in a way that might make it easier for your child. We also talked about as well, like for picky eaters, gradually introducing opportunities for them to engage with things that might be challenging for them. So, you've shared such lots of wonderful tips, Sonia, and we really appreciate it here today in our discussion of sensory needs. Um, so, those of you who are in need, feel free to reach out to Sonia at her website, and that'll be here in the comments. And for parents who are in need of IEP help, possibly advocacy support, and you have questions about your child's IEP when it comes to evaluations or sensory needs, feel free to reach out to me as well at sdautismhelp.com. That's SD as in San Diego, autismhelp.com, as I love to help families with IEPs and advocacy throughout California and the US. So, again, I'm Crystal Sanford, your host. Thank you again, Sonia. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Thank you. It was such a great time.
And if you have questions, parents, definitely look into leaving us a comment or reaching out to us. And we'll see you in the next episode of Thriving Special Families. Bye bye.